Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be doing my final governor predictions for the 2022 midterm elections. Before I start, I'd like to say if you like my content, subscribe to the channel and leave a like and comment and turn on the notification bell so you know when we upload. This is going to be the second to last video for this election cycle on this channel, but I do plan on doing post-election content and content leading up to 2024. So make sure you subscribe so you can see all of that. With that said, let's get into it. So I'm going to start, as I always do, with the solid Democrat states. So I'm going to fill in California, which is obvious. Newsom's going to win. He hung on the recall election last year. Hawaii, Jared Polis in Colorado is very popular. Heidi Ganahl is very behind in the polls. He's probably going to win by over 10 points. So I'm calling Colorado solid Democrat. Same with Illinois. J.B. Pritzker, just because of how blue the state is, I think it's going to be solid Democrat. It could drop below 10, but I don't think it's going to, so I am calling Illinois solid Democrat. These two states here, Maryland and Massachusetts, both have Republican liberal governors. Larry Hogan in Maryland is term limited, and Charlie Baker in Massachusetts is retiring, and both of their replacement candidates are Trump Republicans, and they just don't do well in these states, so these are basically automatic flips for Democrats. Next is the state of Connecticut. I believe that Ned Lamont's going to win by 10 points. This was competitive 4 years ago. This is actually a rematch of the 2018 election, and Stefanowski ran a much better campaign 4 years ago. Now he just kind of screwed up, and he's going to lose by a big margin. In Rhode Island, I could see this one getting below the 10-point margin, but I don't think it's going to. I think it's going to be a solid Democrat race. So that's all the solid Democrat states. I'm going to do the solid Republican states now, starting with the state of Idaho, Wyoming, Nebraska. South Dakota looked like it could have been competitive, but I believe Kristi Noem is going to win by a pretty big margin here. Arkansas is obviously going to be very big Republican victory. Texas, Greg Abbott is going to kill Beto O'Rourke here. He is going to crush him. Beto O'Rourke was a good candidate against Ted Cruz in a blue wave midterm year, and even then he couldn't win. There's no way he gets even close to touching Abbott here. I think it's going to be probably a 13-point race here. The state of Oklahoma looked like it could have been competitive. In fact, a lot of polls showed that it is competitive, but the same thing happened in 2018. There were a lot of polls showing this to be close or that had the Democrat winning. And then Kevin Stitt won by like 10 or 12 points. I forget what it was. I think something similar is going to happen this time. The polls are showing it to be close, but he's probably going to win easily. Tennessee and Alabama and also South Carolina are very obviously solid Republican states here, and the state of Florida is also going to be solid Republican because DeSantis is extremely popular and he's polling way ahead of Charlie Crist. I could see DeSantis winning probably by 12 points here, so I'm calling Florida solid Republican. Next up are the Rust Belt states of Iowa and Ohio. Both have very popular Republican incumbents. They're both states that are trending Republican as time goes on. Kim Reynolds is going to win easily here. Mike DeWine could even win by up to 20 points in Ohio. I think it'll be just shy of that, but I think it's possible. And finally, we have two more, Vermont and New Hampshire. Phil Scott is the governor of Vermont. He's a liberal Republican here, but he is very popular, and Democrats don't really do as well on the state level in Vermont as they do on the federal level, like in the presidency and in the Senate. So Phil Scott is going to win easily here. Similarly, in New Hampshire, Chris Sununu is a very popular governor. He's not as liberal as Phil Scott, but New Hampshire is not as liberal of a state as Vermont is. So I do think Chris Sununu is going to win very easily here. Next, I'm going to fill in the likely Democrat states, of which there are two, and I'm going to start with the state of Maine. Incumbent governor, Democrat Janet Mills, is running against former governor, Republican Paul LePage, and there hasn't been much polling out of Maine this cycle, unfortunately, but it does look like Mills is going to win by a pretty decent margin. It's possible that LePage outperforms his polling margin as he usually does, but the last two times he was elected, in 2010 and 2014, I believe 2010 was a four-way race and 2014 was a three-way race, and he didn't get a majority of the vote in either election. He's faced a lot of criticism because after he left office in 2019, he went down to Florida for a couple years to live there and then came back to Maine to run for governor again. I just don't think he's very popular here. I think he's probably going to lose by around 7 points, so I'm calling Maine likely Democrat. The next likely Democrat state is going to be the state of New York. Kathy Hochul is not popular here, and she is not doing well in the polls. It looks like Lee Zeldin could do well here, but I just don't see it happening. I think New York is just too blue of a state to flip in this environment. I think that Zeldin is going to do way better than Republicans usually do in New York, but I still think he's going to lose by around 7 points, even though Kathy Hochul is really unpopular. And according to a lot of polls, it seems like Andrew Cuomo would have kind of trounced Lee Zeldin, but Kathy Hochul is just way less popular, and that's why this race has become so competitive. But I still don't think it's that competitive. I think that Zeldin's going to lose by around 7 points, so I am calling New York likely Democrat. So those are the only two likely Democrat states I have, so I'm going to move into the solid Republican states, or the likely Republican states now, starting with the state of Alaska. Alaska is really only in this column because of the ranked choice voting system. Mike Dunleavy is probably a heavy favorite for re-election here. I'd probably call him a 90% favorite here. The only reason I think it could be within 10 is because of ranked choice voting, and former independent governor Bill Walker is running here, and I think the Democrat is going to be eliminated in the first round, and that the second round is going to be Dunleavy versus Walker. I think it could get within 10, but that's why I have it likely Republican. But in terms of probability, I think this is a solid Republican race, but I do this by vote margin, so I am calling Alaska likely Republican. Next up is the state of Georgia. Brian Kemp is clearly running away with this race. Stacey Abrams is lagging in the polls, and Brian Kemp has been up by like 6 to 10 points this entire time. I think he's probably going to win by around 8 points. Stacey Abrams just isn't running a great campaign here. She's not very popular. She is good at getting out the vote, and that's what she did in 2020, and that's part of the reason that Biden won the state in 2020, but I just don't see her winning here at all. I could even see Kemp winning by double digits here, but I do think he's only going to win by 8 points, so I am calling Georgia likely Republican, which is a pretty big victory considering the fact that Kemp was struggling with the Republican base after the 2020 election because he was feuding with Donald Trump, but it does look like that ultimately didn't matter and that Kemp is going to win by a big margin. So that's all of the solid and likely Republican and Democrat states that I have for this election. Republicans start at 25, just one shy of having a majority of the state governorships, and Democrats are starting at 16. So now I'm going to cover the toss-up states, starting with the state of Oregon. Now, the state of Oregon is a unique gubernatorial race this year because it is a three-way race between Republican Christine Drazan, Democrat Tina Kotek, and Independent Betsy Johnson. And even though Oregon is a very solid blue state on the national level, on the state level, it can be pretty close. In 2018, Kate Brown only won by 7 points when the national environment was a 9-point Democrat victory. So Kate Brown actually underperformed the national environment in 2018. And Kate Brown is very unpopular, and Tina Kotek has been tied to Kate Brown because I believe she's the Speaker of the Oregon House of Representatives and has had to work with Kate Brown for the last couple years. And because Kate Brown is so unpopular, Tina Kotek actually has tried to distance herself from Kate Brown, but it's not really working, and the Drazan campaign is capitalizing on that. Of course, there's also the independent third-party candidate, Betsy Johnson, that I talked about, and it seems like she's taking mostly from Kotek, which is part of the reason that Drazan is in the lead here. But even in polls where Johnson isn't getting as much support, Drazan is still ahead. She's consistently getting around 13 to 18% of the vote, I'd say, but even when she drops below 10, Drazan is still leading, so it is possible that she's taking roughly equally from both candidates. Initially, I was hesitant to move Oregon into the Republican column just because Oregon is such a blue state, but I do think Drazan is going to narrowly win here, so I am calling Oregon tilt Republican. She's been leading every poll, and undecideds usually break for the opposition party in a midterm election, and so any undecideds will probably go to her. I was also hesitant to give it to Republicans because I thought Betsy Johnson's vote share would drop as time went on, but it seems like she's consistently getting into mid to high teen range, so I do think she's going to get that much in this election. I think Christine Drazan is going to win by a little less than 2 points. Next up, we have the state of Nevada, in which incumbent Democrat Governor Steve Sisolak is running against Joe Lombardo, and Steve Sisolak is not doing well here. He's below 45% on average, which is horrible as an incumbent governor. He's pretty unpopular, and people remember his COVID policies, which they do not approve of. And Joe Lombardo is the sheriff of Clark County, which is the population center of Nevada. That's where Las Vegas is. And that gives him a huge advantage there, because if he's able to cut into Clark County and even possibly win it, that means he's going to win this election. Joe Lombardo has been leading Steve Sisolak in polling by a couple points on average recently, and since the summer has ended. And a lot of people will say that this doesn't matter because Republicans are usually overestimated in Nevada, in contrast to like in the Rust Belt where they're usually underestimated. But Emerson has shown Lombardo with a 4-point lead in their final poll. And that's important because in 2016 and 2018 and 2020, Emerson is one of the only pollsters that did not overestimate Republicans in any race, at least not by a huge margin. I think it's pretty clear that Lombardo is the favorite here, so I am calling Nevada lean Republican in the governor race. In the state of Arizona, Kari Lake is facing off against Katie Hobbs, the Democrat. And a lot of people thought Kari Lake wouldn't do well in Arizona because she's too Trump-like, but she's actually doing very well in this race. She's been leading most polling, except for a recent Marist poll, which has Hobbs up by only 1, and Marist usually favors Democrats by a lot in their polling. Even pollsters like Fox News, which usually way overestimate Democrats in the state of Arizona, have Lake winning this election. I think she's going to win by 3 to 4 points, so I am calling Arizona lean Republican. Katie Hobbs is just not that popular, and she also skipped a debate, which is a really bad move, and Steve Sisolak did the same thing, which is another reason why his popularity was falling apart. And Katie Hobbs, she skipped a debate. That's not a good look for candidates. It's been affecting candidates all over the country. I think that's going to hurt Hobbs. I think it already has hurt Hobbs. There's also been some controversy around Hobbs. She did this like slave day thing in her yearbook back when she was in high school, and there's just been some other things, so her popularity is falling apart. Kari Lake is very well known. She used to be a news anchor in Arizona, and so she has the name recognition here, and that's helping her. I think she's going to win by a couple points, so I am calling Arizona lean Republican. In neighboring New Mexico, Mark Ronchetti, another newscaster, is running for governor against Michelle Lujan Grisham, the incumbent Democrat. I think Lujan Grisham is a narrow favorite here. I think she's probably going to win by 2 to 3 points. New Mexico's been pretty stable in the last couple months. It's been a lean Democrat race for months, in my opinion. Lujan Grisham has been leading most polling here very narrowly, and Trafalgar actually released a poll that had Ronchetti up by 1 point, but Trafalgar does overestimate Republicans in most of their polling, and I think that does need to be taken into account. I think it's possible that Ronchetti wins here. After all, Lujan Grisham is below 50% as an incumbent, which is a very bad sign. But at the end of the day, I do believe that she is going to squeak out a victory by a little more than 2 points, so I am calling New Mexico lean Democrat. However, things do look bad for them here compared to usual, and Biden actually went to New Mexico to campaign there, which could be a sign that Democrats are in more danger than I am admitting right now. But I do think Lujan Grisham is going to win by a little over 2 points, so I'm standing by my New Mexico lean Democrat call. In the state of Kansas, this is one of the states that I'm least sure about in this election because there has been like no polling out of the state of Kansas. The only polls out of Kansas have been Emerson, which have Kelly narrowly leading, but I do still think that Derek Schmidt is going to win narrowly, but I could see it going either way, to be totally honest with you. In Republican wave years, polls do tend to overestimate Democrats here. We saw that in 2014 in the Senate race. I could see it happening again here. Although Kelly is a pretty good candidate, she's the incumbent governor, so she has that advantage. She's good at being a moderate, which she has that advantage too. But just because of the wave year, I feel like this seat is going to flip, but to be totally honest, I'm not sure, so take this one with a grain of salt. Next up is the state of Minnesota. At the beginning of the cycle, it looked like Walz was going to run away with this one, but recent polling does have Minnesota kind of close, and Trafalgar actually had it tied, and like I said before, in New Mexico, Trafalgar does tend to overestimate Republicans, but it is worth noting that they do have Minnesota close. Scott Jensen hasn't been running the best campaign, but it does still seem like because of the national environment, late undecideds are breaking for him. I had this one as likely Democrat, but I am moving it to lean Democrat. I do still think Walz is going to win a second term, but I think it's going to be a much narrower margin than 2018 and what I was initially expecting for 2022. I'd say Walz probably wins by around 4 to 5 points right now, so I think the lean Democrat margin does make sense here. Next up is the state of Wisconsin. Incumbent Democrat Tony Evers is running for a second term against Tim Michels, and it does look like Michels is a narrow favorite here. Michels is leading in the polling average by a very small margin right now, but as we know, usually Republicans are underestimated in the state of Wisconsin. Tony Evers actually was not really underestimated or overestimated in the 2018 governor election. The polling average was pretty accurate, but the polls in that race were kind of all over the place. They had some with Evers leading by a lot and some with Scott Walker leading by a lot, and it ultimately ended up being a 1-point race for Tony Evers. In this one, the polling's a lot more consistent with a narrow Michels lead. There is one poll, Siena, which has Evers up 2, but Siena notoriously overestimates Democrats. I do think that Tim Michels is going to narrowly win here, so I'm calling Wisconsin tilt Republican. Even though the polling was fairly accurate in 2018, late undecideds are probably going to break for Republicans in this race because of the midterm year, and Michaels is already leading the polling. I think it could be a lean Republican race, but right now I do think Michaels is going to keep it close, or Evers is going to keep it close, and Michaels is only going to win by a little over 1 point. The penultimate state here is going to be the state of Michigan, in which Gretchen Whitmer, the incumbent Democratic governor, is running against Republican Tudor Dixon. This is another race where it looked like Whitmer was going to run away with this, but in recent weeks, it looks like Tudor Dixon has caught up to her, or not necessarily caught up, but definitely closed in the margin. Whitmer was leading by up to 16 points in the Real Clear Politics aggregate as recently as September, but now she's only up by 4.4 points. I do still think that Dixon or Whitmer is going to win, but I think Dixon has definitely closed in on her. Yeah, I could see this one flipping, but right now I do think Whitmer is going to win by a little more than 2 points, so I am calling Michigan lean Democrat. It is important to note that in the Rust Belt, and especially in Michigan and Wisconsin, Republicans are usually underestimated, but I do still think that Whitmer is going to win narrowly, even with the wavier and undecideds breaking for Dixon. I just think that it closed in too late for Whitmer to lose. Finally, we have the state of Pennsylvania, in which Attorney General Josh Shapiro is running against State Senator Republican Doug Mastriano. Right now, Shapiro is leading in the Real Clear Politics average by over 10 points. I don't think that this is going to be a solid Democrat race, obviously, because I didn't put it in the solid Democrat race. Republicans are underestimated in Pennsylvania consistently, and Mastriano was underestimated in the primary, and Shapiro was overestimated in the polls in his 2020 Attorney General race. If polls are undercounting Western Pennsylvania like they did in the primary, it is possible that Doug Mastriano wins. I am not expecting a 10-point polling error here. I am expecting like a 6 or 7 point polling error here. So I am calling Pennsylvania lean Democrat, but I do think Mastriano has a much better shot than people are giving him. I think Shapiro probably wins by 4, but if the polling error is a lot wider than I expected, I do think Mastriano could win. I would probably put him at about a 25% chance of victory right now, which is not impossible, but I do think it's unlikely. So this is my final governor prediction, 30 Republicans to 20 Democrats, because I have Republicans picking up governorships in the state of Oregon, Nevada, Kansas, and Wisconsin, and Democrats picking up governorships in the states of Maryland and Massachusetts. If you like this video, leave a like and comment telling me what you think I got right, what you think I got wrong. Let me know your predictions. Subscribe to the channel so you can see my final Senate prediction and any content I upload after the election. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a great day.